no two paths to college hockey are the same. So, understand your path, empower yourself, educate yourself, but don't compare yourself.
Well, I am so excited to have with us today Sadie Lundquist, Director of Women's Hockey for College Hockey, Inc. And as you all know, I love talking about entrepreneurship. I love talking about mental health. And I also love talking about hockey. So welcome to the show, Sadie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so listen, so we can kind of, give our listeners an idea of who you are and where you came from, right? What can you give us like a 10,000-foot view of your career, your affiliation with hockey, if you will,
Yeah.
up until, your role now with College Hockey, Inc.
Yeah, definitely. I think I always have to start with where I'm from. I'm originally from northern Minnesota, a small town, Collegiate, just outside of Duluth. And I bring that up because it's still a big part of who I am. It certainly shaped me as a person, but as a hockey player, I grew up in Collegiate playing all my youth and high school hockey. It's a very hockey-oriented town. I come from a big family. Most of my family's still there. So it's a big part of who I am, but that certainly shaped my life and my passion for hockey. And it's what, empowered me and made me able to go to Bemidji State and play 4 years of college hockey, Division I college hockey at Bemidji State. So hockey has certainly been a big part of my life as a player. And then as I left Bemidji, I was super fortunate to get an internship with the Minnesota Wild right out of college. And, I think to be a small town kid, get to play Division I hockey, and then immediately get an internship with the Minnesota Wild was a dream come true. So to say hockey has been a big part of my life, I think would be an understatement. So I spent about 8 years with the Minnesota Wild between sales, service, and marketing departments. I left for a short stint in 2020 to work at a digital marketing agency in the Twin Cities, a super great agency, really smart, really creative. I learned so much. But I think one of the most important things I learned is I needed to be in hockey. It's just my passion. It lies in hockey and how it shaped me and how it can shape, in the next generation. So when Mike and College Hockey Inc. posted this role, I jumped on it. I was just so excited to be a part of it. And, by the final interview, I kept, it started with, I really want this job. And then the final interview was like, I need this job. I know I can do this. I know I can be a big part of this company. So here I am. I got hired in January, so only about 5 months in, but it's already exceeded all my expectations. And to be again in a career focused around hockey, particularly college hockey, and college hockey shapes so much of who I am that I just feel really fortunate to be in this role.
Amazing. And Mike, who you're referring to, is Mike Snee, who we had on our show. He was episode 105. And for those that may have not heard that episode and or are not familiar with College Hockey Inc., can you share a little bit about what you do and what they're about, and we'll dive into what you're specifically doing with the organization.
Definitely. Yep. So we are at our core foundation, we're a nonprofit funded by the NHL to grow and promote college hockey. And really, it started with Mike and team on the men's side back in 2009 as a way to really change that perception and grow college hockey as a viable path to the NHL, right? It was really focused on men's, and a lot of your discussion with Mike in that episode is around eligibility and keeping young boys, young men eligible for college hockey. And that's how it started. But on the women's side, we don't have that problem. We don't have that delayed entry or juniors, and young women are eligible, whether they know
Not yet.
Yes. Whether they know or not, there's no junior league no league stripping their eligibility, maybe some overseas. But so on the women's side, we have to kind of refocus where is our core, pillars of growth. So at a high level, my job is to grow and promote college hockey. And I'm super excited to be a part of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as Mike had talked about, and you alluded to, the path for a male hockey player is a very windy one, and many times a very difficult one to navigate, which is really, I think, the impetus of what College Hockey Inc. is all about, was all about, I
Yeah.
should say, when it was founded, is to help men kind of and boys to figure out that path and not debunk or mess up their college eligibility. So for those of you that have, male players, go check out that episode, because we go into depth about that process, which can be and is very confusing. But let's talk about you for a minute. You now the organization is now delving deeper into women's hockey, because as we've seen by the expansion of some of the leagues, some of the college hockey programs for women, I would say it's really an exploding area within the sport itself. And you became College Hockey Inc.'s first director of women's hockey. What is your mission in your new role? What are you trying to accomplish in this organization that traditionally was geared towards men previously?
Yeah, it's a great question. Growth. That's the word that it comes to, right? Is growth. How are we growing women's hockey? And we're kind of breaking that up into three pillars or three foundational pieces. We're growing the actual landscape of college hockey. So we're working with prospective schools and campuses that want to add women's hockey. Mike was a huge piece in the University of Delaware recently adding women's hockey to their campus. So that was a huge NHL. Mike Snee and College Hockey Inc. worked with the University of Delaware to add that. So that's a big part of it. We have a couple other schools in the mix that we're hopeful will turn on feasibility studies and add women's hockey to their campus. So that's one part of our growth. Another is just the current landscape. How are we telling the stories and highlighting the current athletes and the current campuses and schools that are hosting, just making sure we have a bigger, broader, better audience engaged with women's college hockey. And then that third pillar is kind of our bottom of the funnel. How are we developing prospective student athletes as a nonprofit and a free resource? On the men's side, it's more on combating eligibility. On the women's side, it's just making sure, do they know what it means to be recruited? Do they know what it means to be a student athlete? Do they have the resources to, be ahead of the game and be proactive on clearinghouse and, looking at schools, not just I want to play hockey, but I'm going to be a student athlete and a developing young adult at the school, helping them to pick the campuses and the education that fits them as a student athlete. So those are kind of our three areas of growth that we're focused on. But at the end of the day, our job is just to, make college hockey or women's hockey better than it was before.
Great stuff. And I have to give you some thank yous there, because I went to high school and played high school hockey with a couple of folks who are now parents of girls or women who are now playing on that University of Delaware team. So I know that
Awesome.
they are grateful for that program and for the
Absolutely.
opportunity for their daughter to be in a position to play college hockey at that school. So great stuff. And it's always nice to kind of see that impact personally, not that it's something just out there, out and about in the universe, that people and student athletes are actually benefiting from it. So that's fantastic. So along those lines, what advice would you give to a young female athlete or young female athletes in general that are aspiring to play college hockey? What advice do you have for them?
Gosh, yeah, it's a great question. It's my advice, and I think as you get older, you understand this more. But we actually just finished up a goalie research project. So, one thing on the women's side is we're starting from scratch. So we'll build out goalie research, then player research, and we'll start to look at it more holistically. But we just finished a Division I female goalie research project, and what it does is it reinforces the idea that every single path to college hockey is different. And we see that on the men's side, right? We see different ages and leagues and whatnot that they come from. And there's probably some more variables on the men's side, so you expect that. But even on the women's side, no two paths to college hockey are the same. So, understand your path, empower yourself, educate yourself, but don't compare yourself. Don't look at that other player and the date they committed or where they committed or, all those different things. I think we just really encourage these student athletes to say, you are a young adult, you're going to be a student, and you're going to be an athlete. Make sure your path and your college that you choose fits all three of those areas for you. I'm from small town northern Minnesota. Some of the schools that recruited me, I just knew I wouldn't fit on campus, or I wouldn't maybe adjust as well as I did to going to a small northern Minnesota school. So we're just really trying to encourage student athletes to say, really don't just say I want to play college hockey. Find college hockey that fits you and is going to develop you as a young adult and a student and an athlete. So, I think that's just the one thing we can say is this: the research shows no paths are the same. So certainly don't try to make your path identical to someone else's. Learn from them, right? Empower yourself and educate yourself. Learn. Certainly they're going to overlap and they're going to look similar at times, but I'm a big believer that comparison is the thief of happiness. And as these kids compare themselves to others, especially with social media and, announcement days get bigger, it's great. We want to celebrate each other's success, but certainly don't compare yourself.
Agreed. I mean, what areas do you see the most potential for growth? You and College Hockey Inc., the most potential for growth and improvement within women's collegiate hockey?
Yeah, I think still growing that landscape, right? Like I said, we're working with a few more schools that want to add college hockey. So we want more schools for girls to play at. We want to broaden that landscape of women's hockey. And, this may be a bit of a cop-out, but to grow college hockey, we also need to focus on the bottom of the funnel. Kids who play college hockey are of that certain percentage that made it through. So how do we look at that, 50 or 60% that didn't play college hockey and say, how do we make a better experience for them? Because we can build more opportunities to play college hockey, but unless we're filling the bottom of that funnel with passionate young kids who love the sport, there's not going to be enough kids to fill these positions. And you might kind of as a chicken or the egg, like how do we make more college campuses and more opportunities for college kids? But we also make sure that we're focusing on the bottom of the funnel and saying, how do we get more 5 and 6-year-old girls playing hockey, loving hockey? And how do we make sure that they have a place to play when they're 10 through 14, so they're not being left out, or they're not in areas that don't set them up for success? So, I think like I said before, it's all about growth, and how do we grow all these different areas that work together to holistically bring the sport up to a better level.
So, I mean, along the lines of this growth trajectory, right? As the sport grows, in the ways that you describe, bottom of the funnel, creating more programs so that these young women, female athletes, can eventually move into those roles within those college hockey teams. Do you expect or foresee or think that you're going to see a similar infrastructure as things get to that size or that level to what we see on the men's side with a junior hockey league and feeder programs? Do you see that as part of that expansive growth, or is it going to remain something that's going to be similar but yet different at the same time?
I think we'd like for it to remain similar but different. I don't know that there's enough. I don't know that there'd be enough to emulate the men's side. I don't know that we'd want to emulate the men's side either. I think that if you really look at, if we wanted to emulate a path, as I'm from Minnesota, so it's easy for me to say this, but we would love to emulate that grassroots effort more across other leagues and states, just to say, how can you build up your youth in your high school hockey in your hometown and develop, or at different, academies and schools. So I think we would like to just build out and better the process that we have, just so it enables more girls to play and more girls to move forward, and then more opportunities for them to play in college. So I don't know that we necessarily want to emulate the men's on this one, but.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's good and bad there, right? Like anything else. With the changing landscape of collegiate athletics in general and the evolving, NCAA regulations, how do you help athletes, and in your role specifically, female athletes, navigate these unique challenges and opportunities that, now may present to them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tough question, because it is ever changing, right? With the world of NLIs and just the ever changing of rules and regulations. So as a nonprofit, again, we just want to be that sounding voice, that reliable voice that people can come to say, here's what you can do and here's what you can't do. And and let's attempt to ungray these NCAA rules and regulations, which are very, very gray. So that's just what college hockey is. We want to prepare them for college. We want to be that sounding voice and resource. But as things are changing, that's just a spot where we'll live as well to say, here are the things you can do. Here's the things you can't do. Here's how you can set yourself up for success. And just try to always live and breathe with those changes of the current college landscape as well. And, a big part of that right now in women's hockey is the PWHL. It's new and it's exciting and it's great. But as we look at their draft declaration and how they bring in players, now we kind of have to take a step back and say, how does that impact college hockey?
Right.
97% of their players 93% of their players come from NCAA hockey. And it's going to build more momentum and there's going to be more success. So we have to prepare our athletes to say, here's what you have to, here are implications if you declare for the draft, or here are implications if a team wants you to leave college early, and really, adapt to those changing landscapes with the PWHL and NCAA influence there.
Yeah, I mean, NIL, I think, is a bit challenging. I think, whether you're male or female, it's a bit of a question mark at this point. I think until we start seeing some challenges in the instance where somebody gets NIL and maybe they were or weren't supposed to, I think that the rules and regulations, like many rules and regulations, are not crystal clear a lot of times. And until you have that, legal impact to kind of force one or both sides to really become clear about what can and can't be done, we're kind of working in this no man's land to some degree with a lot of these athletes. Don't you agree?
Definitely. And I think another thing to acknowledge is hockey is not of that upper echelon of these NILs, right? There are certainly players that are taking advantage of it, and you should absolutely, how can you use this to an entrepreneurial spirit to build your brand and whatnot? But I think one thing we can do in hockey is learn, right? We're seeing the footballs and the basketballs of the world really be those front runners. So not to say that hockey is not taking advantage of it, that they can't take advantage of it. It's just it's not to the degree that some of those, power sports are. So how can we learn from the things that we're seeing on those stages as they carry down into hockey?
Yeah, agreed. And I think the number of athletes, I think I read a study somewhere, and I'm not sure exactly who put it out, but I think across the whole landscape of NCAA athletes, I think the average NIL monetary amount per player is like $500, some minimal amount of money. Although at the top of the funnel, you have these very high, huge deals, but the reality is that's the far and the few. And you have most athletes are not getting any nil whatsoever, or a very minimal amount. So we're hearing about the large ones also, and not necessarily about all the other athletes. So it gets confusing at times, for sure.
Definitely. And an example Mike loves to give is NIL in hockey. It allows a student athlete to go home in the summer and run a camp in their name, right? To say, maybe when I was in college, I could have gone to my small town of Cloquet and said, here's the Sadie Lundquist summer hockey camp. And that would have now, wouldn't have stripped me of my eligibility like it would have before. So there are certainly ways that hockey players can take advantage of this. And like you said, it's, we maybe have to not be so distracted by the top 1% and what they're making and what they're doing, but certainly learn from it and use it to your benefit for your name, image, and likeness, for sure.
Sure. So you mentioned earlier, the PWHL, which is fairly new, and it's I think it's made a pretty good splash. I think the attendance is pretty good, and the following has been great. So they also recently announced that they're moving the traditional nameplates on the hockey jerseys from the back on the top to the bottom of the jersey. To allow people to read them better, because if you watch a PWHL game, it's hard to read the names because usually the longer hair is typically covering it or completely blocking it. So how do you think changes like this will impact how young girls that future bottom of the funnel, right, that you spoke
Mhm.
of earlier. How do you think this will, changes like this will impact those girls who are looking now in their view of the game?
Yeah. I love it. I played in the NWHL, which was the precursor league to the PWHL, and they kind of did the same thing and with the nameplates on the bottom, and I love it because it's what we're saying is, women's hockey, we want the same, we want equality, we want the same opportunity, all this stuff, but also acknowledging that there are subtle differences from women's to men's hockey, like moving the nameplate to the bottom. And for some people it may seem silly. It might be like, okay, great, they move the nameplate, but to women's hockey, it's kind of that nod to, we're not just trying to copy paste the women's games to the men's game. There are natural differences in the game, in the flow, and the rules. And subtle nods to that are just, this is women's hockey, and that's how we're going to do it for women's hockey. And I feel like it's a little differentiator. Again, it's small, it's subtle, it's simple, and to some it may seem silly, but it just gives that nod to, this is women's hockey and how we're going to do it in women's hockey. We're not going to emulate everything the men do, because it's not going to make sense to emulate everything the men do. But at the end of the day, the product is still incredible. It is great hockey. It's physical. They've changed a few of those rules to kind of meet in the middle of men and women's hockey. So it's an exciting game. I think it's really taken off this year, this PWHL season. It feels like there's just a different momentum behind women's hockey right now, and those subtle changes, the small nameplate things, the attention to detail to the women's game feels different than it ever has before. And I think that's a huge I don't know, just outlook
Do
on
you
what
think that's going to lead to more, girls at the younger ages wanting to play the sport because it attracts them more because of those changes and the subtleties, et cetera? Do you find that, these changes and the way they're handling it, I think, will that boost up the interest in the sport, I guess, overall?
Yeah, I think the subtle. Do I think the nameplate moving it was going to add more people? No. Do I think that focus on differentiating the women's game and establishing it as own, and then marketing that and promoting that and celebrating that? I think that's what's going to bring these young girls in. And if you go to a PWHL game right now, you're seeing new fans. You're seeing
Mhm.
people who have maybe never been to hockey, but now they want to support and celebrate women's hockey, and then that in itself is going to bring new fan. Now they may have kids who join hockey, or they
Right.
encourage a family friend to join women's hockey. So I think those subtle changes and the nod to the game will help celebrate the game. Celebrating the game means more fans watching means more people falling in love, and hopefully more young girls playing. So it's just that whole cyclical, how are we bringing more people into the game and celebrating it? And these are our subtle nods to doing so. And as a result, hopefully it grows the game. And yeah, it's been
Yeah.
great. The PWHL has done a good job in different niches. I think they've partnered with Barbie, even, which is, some people again may look at that and seem silly, but they're doing their own clothing line, and they've made hockey specific dolls, and it's those little pieces that now get more attention on the game and help grow the sport.
Yeah, I agree. So let's shift for a moment from the sport to where everybody ends up, right? At some point, whether you're a male or you're a female, hockey comes to an end, and you have to think about a career, because most of us are not, even if we get to the highest level, whether it be the NHL or the PWHL, we're all fairly young at
Yep.
the time that we quote unquote retire from the game. So usually something else is going to have to happen. Ernst and Young found that 96% of C-suite women played sports, which is a huge number, right?
Absolutely.
So what role do you believe sports in general, whether it's hockey or any other, right, play in preparing athletes for professional careers? And, I think there's some kind of correlation here to men too. I don't know what the study
Yep.
is there, but
Definitely.
I think they all have to end up somewhere working usually, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. Unfortunately,
But
we all have
yeah,
to.
I mean that's a high number though. 96% of C-suite women executives played college athletics. I think that's huge. So obviously there's got to be some correlation there. What do you believe that may be?
Yeah, I think right away there's the low hanging fruit of, right, it builds work ethic and discipline, character, it teaches you time management, accountability, all of those things. But I do think like for me growing up, and I think pretty unanimously across the board, is sports is looked at as a privilege, not a right. And so you're kind of taught that, when you're at practice, when you're part of these teams, when you're, competing for your hometown or your school, that's a privilege and not a right. And I think that instills this different level of work ethic and accountability in students and young athletes to say, this is not something that I'm entitled to. This is an opportunity that I get to take. And I do think even building on that, and maybe most importantly, through that experience, you're learning relationship skills and how to handle adversity in those relationships and how to communicate in those relationships. And whether, you agree or disagree with your teammates, whether, you need to rally a team or build something when it feels like things are going against you. And now that is a situation of adversity. I feel like it just teaches and enforces this ability to communicate and navigate adversity with people that whether you agree with or not. So I just think it's the perfect landscape and perfect opportunity for natural leaders to create an environment that people want to buy into. And I just feel like you see athletes often gravitate to those natural leadership positions. And I do think that is a big part of why women specifically do well as they move up in their career. I think also, if on the women's side, you kind of have to be a trailblazer sometimes to make it through women's sports. And you could argue that on the business side too. You have to have people that are willing to be trailblazers and kind of push the norms and the gender norms. So hockey and sports in general, they teach all those things. So I feel like I just ran the entire gamut of things that sports teaches you, but I think you could go on and on the character and the development that sports teaches young kids and how that applies to the workforce. And I know it's certainly shaped who I am and the opportunities I've had in my career. So I just see that echoing across the board, particularly in women's sports.
So I'll put you on the spot for a moment here, and I know you're a little biased here, but with that
Gosh.
being said, do you feel like hockey prepares you any better than any other sport, or it really is very similar across the board?
I think hockey prepared me more because it was my passion. So I think that, if softball is your passion or soccer is your passion, all these team sports, when you really emotionally invest yourself into them, that's when you're, really going to take away these life skills. So I'll be biased, and I think hockey is the greatest sport. So, that's, I think, what developed me the best and what can develop future female hockey players the best. But overall, I love sports. I think you ask any college athlete, they're going to say competitive is one of their top characteristics. And I think that's going to apply across any sport. So
there you go. Okay. We'll take that. And I agree with you. But so how do you kind of alluded this earlier when we were talking about the PWHL and kind of these nuanced differences that they're looking to create, because it is somewhat different. The women's hockey game versus the men's hockey game, and they're trying to attract a different fan base too. So how do you go about navigating the balance between promoting women's hockey and advocating for that gender equity within collegiate athletics at the same time? How do you create that balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think naturally in my role, they go so hand in hand that they kind of naturally balance themselves out. For example, if you look at the creation of my role, that's a testament to, so first of all, the NHL, right? I think it's one thing to say you support women's hockey. It's another thing to financially back the creation of my role. So, Mike and team, even before I was here, they were really advocating for, hey, we focus so much on men's. We need to focus on women's. We need this opportunity for women. So, fighting for that gender equity to even just have a women's representative has now led to being able to promote women's hockey. So I think now that I'm in this role, I'm promoting women's hockey. We're growing the sport, and naturally we're going to see more equity as we grow it and it becomes more popular and people realize that the product is really good. So I think it naturally happens as College Hockey Inc. continues to promote the game. Maybe a little sidetracked from this, we're really trying to build off what women's basketball is doing. It's a great example of of promoting the current game, and as a result, finding more equity in the sport. So I think every women's sports team is really looking at college basketball right now and saying, how do we kind of replicate that? How do we build off of their recent success? And obviously, I know Caitlin Clark is a generational talent that has certainly helped it, but they used that idea of her and these matchups and the Angel Reeses and the LSUs of the world, and they promoted the heck out of it. And as a result, now they're seeing equity and equality across the board. Minnesota actually hosted the Big Ten basketball, and the women's games were sold out packed. And the men's games were sold out, but not as packed as the women's games. So I know it's a stretch. I know it's hard to emulate a generational talent like that, but I think we can certainly look at those type of case studies and just try to emulate that on the women's hockey game and try to build the same success.
Yeah, plus basketball has been trying to move in this direction. They've had a little bit of a little headway, into this area before, I guess, you and College Hockey Inc. got there. So, suffices to say, I think, basketball, like you said, is a good example that it can happen. And I think it bodes really well for your role and what you guys are trying to accomplish, because you also have a model and you have something to kind of look at and emulate in terms of, hey, it can be done because it was done here. Now we know that it can be done. Now we have a lot of work to do, but we could get it up there in a similar vein like basketball has. I think that adds a lot of merit to it.
Yeah, yeah, and we're not going to be able to replicate, right? We are a
Right.
niche sport. All those things, all those considerations, those factors you mentioned. The WNBA has been around so much longer. So when we look at the trajectory of those college athletes to the WNBA is going to be different than ours to the PWHL, but that doesn't mean we can't learn from them and really look at how
Correct.
they've balanced that promoting their sport with that gender equity in college athletics. So,
Right. Great. Well, listen, Sadie, we've talked a lot about a lot of joyful things within college hockey and specifically on women's hockey, and we're all about joy on the Mitlin Money Mindset. So the last question we ask each of our guests is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
gosh, this is a good question too. This might be the toughest one. I maybe this is the athlete in me, but I am a creature of habit. So every morning I get up and the first thing I do is I make my bed. It is now the first task of the day that I have accomplished and started out my day of completing that. But immediately after that, I go to the gym. And again, it might seem like, okay, wow, great. Most people do that, but I go to a gym that's very community based. It's locally owned. I get in there early in the morning with like-minded people and really start my day having accomplished these two tasks and bettered myself, spent time with like-minded people. And I can usually tell the days I don't go to the gym around 2 or 3 o'clock, I start to hit that lull, and it usually correlates with the days that I don't start that. So, it's kind of a silly, maybe simple answer, but as a former athlete, that's just the best way for me to get going and start my day on a positive note.
Makes a lot of sense. And we've had a handful of people start out their day by making their bed. So you're not
Good.
the first, and I assure you probably won't be the last. So
Goodness, no.
it's a good way to start the morning with your first win of the day, and an easy win at that. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. So listen, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, Sadie, but if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, learn more about College Hockey Inc., what's the easiest and the best place for them to be able to do that?
Yeah, I would say our website, just collegehockeyinc.com. That's INC. All of our contact information is on there. Our social handles are on there. We're pretty active on both Instagram and Twitter. So I would say follow us on there. But at the end of the day, my contact information is on there. So while we do different seminars and different events, also open to just, hey, do you have a young prospective student athlete or parents that want to connect? Let's connect one-on-one. So certainly feel free to reach out and let College Hockey Inc. be a resource for you. That's what we aim to do.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Sadie. It's all about growing this great game that we all love, on the women's side. And like I said, those families that I know probably, definitely 5-10 years ago, they wouldn't have had the opportunity for their daughter to play at the collegiate level like they do now. So it's exciting to watch more families be able to experience that. So thank you. Thank you for your time, and enjoy your day.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.